Hello and welcome to Guidance Review. I'm David Pudwill, and today we're going to be talking about FDA's guidance document on acceptance and filing reviews for pre-market approval applications, or PMAs, which was published in December of 2019. Three key takeaways for today's video are 1, basic review policies and procedures, 2, acceptance and filing review principles, and 3, checklists for acceptance and filing of PMAs. So let's go ahead and get into the guidance document here. So if we pull up the guidance document, and you'll have the link in the description, we can go ahead and scroll down. We can download the final guidance document. We can head over to the docket, which we'll go ahead and do. And here we'll see, because today is a Tuesday or a Thursday when I'm shooting this video, it takes me over to the beta site. And we can scroll down and check out docket details. We have to go over here to browse and comment on documents. That'll pull us over here. And then we can pull up the notice, which is where we have to go to actually navigate here and get to the comments section, which we can scroll down and see here. And then the top couple comments here, we have AdvaMed comments. We also have comments from MDMA, and we have comments from Cook Group. And I'm going to go ahead and start off with the comment made by Cook Group here about the reclassification under 513F2. And this is specifically around de novo classifications, and this was actually implemented. Now, these comments, I won't spend a whole lot of time on these comments because these were for the 2012 guidance that was put out, and we're going to be going through the updated 2019. So these are some relatively old comments and were reviewed and considered by FDA about 8 years ago now. So here we see there's a little bit of of detail here in terms of comments. Just to highlight, if you are going to make comments, include the line numbers that are applicable, your change, your reason. This format that AdvaMed uses is very effective for at least communicating what your concerns are so that FDA can clearly identify and then make a determination on whether they agree with your comments or not. And then here we've got a high-level set of comments by MDMA, generally supportive of what FDA has been doing. And they had a comment here about some of the acceptance decision criteria. And over here we have, again, just a little bit of hopeful news for you from this relatively old set of comments, but hopeful news that occasionally FDA does take your comments and implement them in their guidance document updates. So well done, Cook, with some of these comments. So we'll go ahead and pull up the guidance document itself here and get into it. This particular document was issued on December 16, 2019, and the original document was published in May of 2003. And this document supersedes the acceptance and filing reviews for pre-market approval applications for PMAs dated February 21st, 2019. And here, if you have questions, there are some contact details for you. And this particular guidance document is for the Center for Devices and Radiological Health and the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research. And here, if you have public comment, we've just been over to regulations.gov, but there are a couple ways you can submit those comments if you have any. And you can request additional copies if you so desire. And here we get into an introduction, and we see some call out of the PMA regulation that identifies the criteria that, if not met, may serve as a basis for refusing to file a PMA. This guidance is intended to be used by FDA staff and the device industry to help elucidate the broad preclinical and clinical issues that need to be addressed in a PMA and the key decisions to be made during the filing process. Focusing the agency's review resources on complete applications will provide a more efficient approach to ensuring that safe and effective medical devices reach patients as quickly as possible. And here then FDA also goes into a little bit of detail about the history of the Medical Device User Fee and Modernization Act and its various reauthorizations and amendments. And here FDA notes at a high level that they have separated the criteria for PMA filing, and this has been a couple years now, into 1, acceptance criteria, and 2, filing criteria. And we'll get into both of those checklists here a little bit later. Acceptance review involves assessment of the completeness of the application and informing the applicant in a written response within the first 15 calendar days of receipt of the application by the Document Control Center whether any elements are missing, and if so, identifying the missing elements. And here, in order to enhance the consistency of acceptance and filing decisions and to help applicants better understand the types of information that FDA needs to conduct a substantive review of a PMA, this guidance and associated checklist clarify the necessary elements and contents of a complete PMA application. And the process outlined is applicable to all devices reviewed in a PMA application and has been compiled into a checklist for use by FDA review staff. And FDA staff and industry should note that this guidance is not significantly different from the previous PMA filing checklist and guidance document, which I've had the pleasure of going through myself when I was at FDA. And as the PMA filing criteria defined in the regulation have not changed. The preliminary questions remain the same, and the filing review questions have been separated into acceptance decision questions, that is, whether a file is administratively complete, and filing decision questions, that is, to determine the basic adequacy of the technical elements of the PMA. In the 2003 PMA filing guidance, FDA stated that delayed submission of the manufacturing section would not preclude filing a PMA, and if this section was not included in the original PMA application, recommended submitting this section within 90 days. However, delayed submission of the manufacturing section has rarely occurred in recent years, and in many cases, this section is submitted prior to other sections of the PMA as part of a modular PMA application. Therefore, we are now including the manufacturing section in the checklist for a complete PMA application for an original PMA or a panel track supplement with a new manufacturing site or substantially different manufacturing procedures. FDA requires all applicants to provide one electronic copy or e-copy of the PMA application. The e-copy must be accompanied by a single paper copy of your signed cover letter. FDA has issued guidance to implement Section 745A(b) of the FD&C Act, added here in FDASIA, which provides statutory authority to require an e-copy for most submissions, including original PMAs and PMA supplements. With the implement of this provision, a valid e-copy is required in order for a PMA or PMA supplement to be processed and for the acceptance review to begin. FDA's guidance documents, including this guidance, do not establish legally enforceable responsibility, and FDA talks about how they use the word should. And here, just note that there are a couple criteria for not processing a PMA that's been received. And that could be that the application is not submitted with a required user fee and user fee payment identification number, the application cover letter, or the CDRH premarket review submission cover sheet, that form 3514. 2, the application is not signed or countersigned by a U.S. representative. And 3, the firm did not submit the correct number of copies, such as e-copy. For instance, any PMA not meeting these 3 criteria will not be processed by the Document Mail Center or CBER Regulatory Project Manager, and these are not requirements that are included in the checklist. These preclude FDA even getting to the checklist, so bear that in mind. And here we get into the purpose. The purpose of the PMA acceptance and filing reviews is to make a threshold determination about whether an application is administratively complete for the agency to undertake a substantive review. And the PMA regulation states that FDA may refuse to file a PMA if any of the following applies. 1, the PMA is incomplete because it doesn't contain all the information required. 2, the PMA does not contain each of the items required under Section 814.20, and justification for omission of any item is inadequate. 3, the applicant has a pending pre-market notification under Section 510K with respect to the same device, and FDA has not determined whether the device falls within the scope of Section 814.1, Part C. And 4, the PMA contains a false statement of material fact. Or 5, the PMA is not accompanied by a statement of either certification or disclosure as required by 21 CFR Part 54. Section 814.20 of the regulation further specifies that PMAs must include, among other things, technical sections which shall contain certain data and information in sufficient detail to permit FDA to determine whether to approve or deny approval of the application. FDA staff has frequently expressed the need for more specific guidance in applying this regulatory standard to the PMA application filing decision-making process. The goal of this document is to clarify the criteria for accepting and filing a PMA, thereby enhancing the consistency of FDA's acceptance and filing decisions. The decision-making process presented in this document is captured in checklists for acceptance and filing of PMAs, and that's in Appendix A, which we'll get to here a little bit later. FDA staff will use these checklists during the acceptance and filing review processes. And then in terms of the scope, this is applicable to original PMA applications and panel track PMA supplements. And here there's the caveat that FDA's decision to accept or file a PMA does not imply that the data provided in the PMA demonstrate reasonable assurance of the safety and effectiveness of your device or assure approval of the PMA. In addition, it should be noted that this document is focused on the regulatory and scientific criteria for making an accept or refuse to accept or RTA decision, as well as a file or not file decision for a PMA. It specifically does not alter the following administrative aspects of the PMA filing process: the time frame for the filing review phase, that is 45 days, which includes the time spent conducting the acceptance review, the processes for document tracking, distribution, and handling, and the procedures for assembling the review team and setting up the filing meeting. This document does not discuss the statutory criteria for breakthrough device designation. Information pertaining to this designation can be found in this guidance, which is linked. And this document does not address the monetary aspects or the MDUFA goals associated with PMAs. And for information on that, you can go to the Medical Device User Fees webpage, which is linked here as well. In terms of Q submission interaction, prior to interacting with review staff, applicants should consult CDRH's Division of Industry and Consumer Education, or DICE, or CBER's Manufacturers Assistance and Technical Training branch for general information regarding the PMA regulations. Before submitting a PMA, FDA encourages applicants to interact with FDA review staff. Such Q submission interaction is an important way of improving the quality and completeness of a PMA. And a face-to-face meeting with FDA staff may be useful for applicants prior to preparing the PMA to discuss issues related to the specific device and PMA. And here's some further link as well to the Q submission program. In addition, there's some device advice and CDRH device-specific and cross-cutting guidance document links here, which may be valuable for you as you're preparing your PMA. Basic review policies and procedures. The review policies for acceptance here are outlined by FDA, and specifically to facilitate a more efficient review process, FDA staff will conduct an acceptance review of all original PMAs and panel track PMA supplements based on objective criteria using the checklist for acceptance review to ensure that the PMA is administratively complete. In order for the application to be accepted, all organizational and administrative elements should be present, or a rationale should be provided for those elements determined by the applicant to be not applicable. And this acceptance review will happen within 15 days. And again, the caveat about an acceptance review only being beginning for PMAs for which the appropriate user fee has been paid and a validated e-copy has been received. If the application contains all of the information outlined in the checklist, then the applicant will be notified that the PMA has been accepted and will proceed to the filing review. If FDA fails to complete the acceptance review within 15 calendar days, the application should be considered accepted. The applicant should be notified electronically, and FDA should commence with the filing review. In case of a government closure during the 15-day review period, the review period may be extended by a comparable number of business days that the FDA buildings are closed. If the applicant receives an automated notice that the acceptance review was not completed because the acceptance review period has exceeded 15 days, FDA may send a correction notice to the applicant. In such cases, if the application is accepted and filed, the extended acceptance review period would not otherwise impact the performance goal for a MDUFA decision on the application. If one or more of the items in the inventory of organizational administrative elements within the acceptance checklist are not present, the lead reviewer conducting the acceptance review should obtain division concurrence that the application should be designated RTA and notify the designated PMA contact person electronically that the application has not been accepted. FDA staff should also provide the applicant with a copy of the completed acceptance checklist indicating which items are the bases for the RTA designation. And the applicant may respond to the RTA notification by providing the missing information identified in the checklist, and the applicant should submit this information to be included in the file as an amendment under the original assigned PMA number. A new application and new user fee are not necessary, nor should the applicant resend the entire PMA application unless FDA determines otherwise, and this would be if the application was in a serious disarray or difficult to navigate, and FDA told you to resubmit a PMA in its entirety. It's sufficient to submit and address only the information requested per the acceptance checklist. Upon receipt of the newly submitted information, FDA should conduct the acceptance screening again following the same procedure within 15 calendar days of receipt. If the application is still found to be incomplete, FDA staff should notify the contact person and provide the new checklist indicating the missing items. This cycle will continue until the PMA is found to be administratively complete. Review policies for filing. Once the application is found to be administratively complete, FDA staff should notify the applicant that the PMA has been accepted and begin the filing review according to the checklist for filing review. The objective of the filing review is to determine the basic adequacy of the technical elements of the PMA. In order for the application to be filed, the application should be sufficiently complete to permit a substantive review. Once the filing review is complete, staff will notify the applicant electronically within 45 calendar days of receipt whether the PMA has been filed or not filed. If the PMA has been filed, the agency will identify the date of receipt of the PMA or of the amendment to the PMA that enabled FDA to file the PMA. The PMA applicant may respond to the not filed notification by providing the missing information identified in the letter. The applicant should submit this information to be included in the file as an amendment under the originally assigned PMA number. Upon receipt of the newly submitted information, FDA staff should conduct the filing review again following the same procedure within 45 calendar days of receipt. During the filing review, review staff may ask for any information that should have resulted in an RTA designation during the acceptance review. Likewise, once the application has been filed, FDA may ask for any information during the substantive review that may have been unintentionally overlooked during the acceptance or filing reviews. In terms of the FDA review clock, as explained in the commitment letter for MDUFA 4, FDA days begin on the date of receipt of the submission or of the amendment to the submission that enables the submission to be accepted or filed. Since the PMA acceptance criteria are a subset of the PMA filing criteria under 21 CFR 814.42. An application that is not accepted is not one that enables the application to be filed. Thus, the FDA review clock does not start when an application is placed on e-copy or user fee hold or is designated not accepted or not filed. Once FDA has both accepted and filed the application, the FDA review clock begins as of the date of receipt of the most recent application or amendment that made the PMA complete and on which the FDA based its accepted and filed decisions. This date will not change even if FDA later requests information it should have requested during the acceptance or filing review. Then there are some combination product administrative items. 21st Century Cures Act amended Section 503G, and if you have a combination product PMA, you should go ahead and look through this information to confirm that you're meeting the expectations laid out here around applicants of combination products that do not contain as a constituent part an approved drug, or applicants of combination products that contain as a constituent part an approved drug, and the various certifications that you would have to provide for that. In terms of acceptance and filing review principles, in order to use this guidance appropriately, FDA staff should review the following basic principles in bold, followed by a description of FDA's review policies and procedures. These policies and the objective criteria outlined in the acceptance and filing checklists inform FDA's PMA acceptance and filing decisions. The contents of the PMA should allow the substantive review to proceed. The PMA must contain the basic administrative and scientific elements listed in 21 CFR 814.20. And the specific questions in the acceptance and filing checklists are intended to help FDA ensure that the PMA contents are not so disorganized or incomplete so as to prevent the review team from proceeding with the substantive review of the application. The acceptance decision and a filing decision should not be based on a substantive review of the data and information in the PMA. And FDA is just reaffirming that fact here. Concerns identified by the agency during the acceptance or filing review regarding results and outcomes of non-clinical and clinical studies would not preclude acceptance or filing. Examples of information that would typically fall into this category include demographic information for the study population, conclusions regarding statistical analyses, report or assessment of protocol deviations, and reports of device failures or malfunctions. Staff should determine whether the applicant provided a justification for any alternative approach. If the applicant believes any criteria in the checklist are not applicable, it should explain its rationale. Likewise, the applicant should provide a rationale for any deviation from a device-specific or cross-cutting guidance document or FDA-recognized standard. It is FDA's expectation that any item in the checklist that is missing will be addressed with a rationale explaining why it is not applicable, and that any deviations will be explained. If a justification to omit certain information or for taking an alternative approach is provided, FDA will consider the adequacy of that justification or alternative approach during substantive review of the application. A given criterion in the checklist will be considered not present if the application fails to include either the information requested or a rationale for omission. And then in terms of PMA acceptance and filing reviews, the decision to accept an application or designate it refuse to accept should be made by the lead reviewer with a concurrence from the immediate supervisor or designee. The decision to file or not file a PMA should be made at the division level in collaboration with the PMA review team and the appropriate managers in the reviewing divisions. And then we get into the checklist. Here we have some preliminary questions. If the lead reviewer's responses to the preliminary questions and subsequent consultation with the center personnel identified below indicate that the PMA acceptance and filing review should not continue, the lead reviewer should promptly inform the PMA review team and notify the applicant using proper administrative procedures. And here are the preliminary questions. Is the product a device or a combination product with a device constituent part subject to review under PMA? 2, is the application with the appropriate center? 3, if a request for designation or RFD was submitted for the device or combination product with the device constituent part and assigned to your center, identify the RFD number and confirm, is the device or combination product the same, that is design or formulation, as that presented in the RFD submission, and are the indications for use for the device or combination product identified in the PMA the same as those identified in the RFD submission? 4, is the application for a combination product that contains a constituent part a drug that has the same active moiety as an approved drug with exclusivity as described in these sections? And is Class 3 or PMA review required for the device? And here, generally, PMA review is required if the device is a transitional device that has not been reclassified, the subject of a final call for PMA, or automatically classified into Class 3 under Section 513F of the FD&C Act, including devices found to be not substantially equivalent, or for which a request for reclassification under 513F2 has been denied by FDA. If regulation under PMA does not appear to be required, the PMA lead reviewer should consult management and other center resources and determine the appropriate action. 6. Is there a pending 510K for the same device with the same indications for use? And 7. Is the applicant the subject of the Application Integrity Policy, or AIP? This is a very bad list to be on. If you're on this list, you've done, or you're at least believed to have done something very serious when it comes to data integrity or presenting false information to FDA. And then we get into the checklist. For the acceptance review, we have a couple acceptance decisions. So if you get past that preliminary checklist, then in terms of acceptance decision 1, the question is the PMA administratively complete? So there are a number of pieces in the checklist that you're going to have to get through to confirm that the PMA is administratively complete. And we have acceptance decision number 2. From only administrative review, does the PMA include data that appears to constitute valid scientific evidence? And again, here, this should not be a substantive review. But if none of the data on their face constitute valid scientific evidence, the PMA should not be accepted. Then we have acceptance decision 3. Does the PMA address the key non-clinical and clinical issues identified by FDA prior to submission of the PMA application, or has the applicant provided a scientific or clinical justification for an alternative approach? Section B of the checklist outlines questions intended to identify whether FDA has previously provided specific guidance to the applicant about the content of the PMA through one or more mechanisms, such as a prior PMA application, a prior not substantially equivalent decision on a 510K, investigational device exemption or IDE letters, Q submission feedback, a determination or agreement meetings, or other substantive communication with FDA, or through a published guidance document. If such information has been communicated to the applicant through one or more of these mechanisms and the PMA application addresses each of the key non-clinical and clinical issues identified by FDA, the answer to the above question is yes. Furthermore, if some of these key issues previously identified by FDA are not addressed, but the PMA application contains a scientific or clinical justification for the omission or deviation, the answer to the above question is also yes. If the PMA application contains a statement that there were no prior submissions for the device, the answer to the above question is yes. These cases do not preclude the review division from accepting the PMA. And then we get into some sub-questions here. Refuse to accept can only be based on answers to the following questions. Are the types of necessary non-clinical and clinical studies well known in the scientific and medical communities for the particular device? Were the issues conveyed to the applicant as part of a documented regulatory process? That could be Q submission, prior PMA, IDEs, NSE, or other letters. And staff should only designate a PMA refused to accept based on a no response to acceptance decision 3 in instances where the key issues were identified by staff as part of a documented regulatory process. And in terms of the filing review, we have 3 filing decisions here. Were the clinical study data collected and analyzed per the protocol? In terms of filing decision number 2, were the non-clinical and clinical data collected on the design of the device? That is, the device design intended to be marketed. And filing decision 3, were the patient or study population and endpoints consistent with the proposed indications? So here we have a little bit of detail for each of these questions to guide FDA review staff and to guide you in trying to make sure that your submission completely addresses these filing decision questions. And then we get into the checklists themselves. And if we scroll down, we see these preliminary questions, which we've gone through, and some direction in terms of what happens based on each of the potential answers to these questions. And then we get into the inventory of organizational and administrative elements. They're either present or not present. Is there a table of contents or bibliography, device characteristics, and summary of the contents? Is the device manufacturing section included? Sterilization, biological, microbiological, immunological, toxicological, biocompatibility, etc. All of the laboratory and bench tests that might be conducted. Get into shelf life and animal studies and some other details here as well. And we get into details about labeling and certifications or declarations of conformity and a number of elements. You want to make sure that these items are present. So go through this checklist prior to submitting your submission and make sure that everything is going to be found to be administratively complete, or for any aspect of this checklist, any particular item that is not included, that you've included a justification for not including that detail here. And we get through the end of this particular checklist and then on to the acceptance decision questions. And decision 1, is the PMA complete? Decision 2, from only administrative review, does the PMA include information that appears to constitute valid scientific evidence? And decision 3, does the PMA address the key non-clinical and clinical issues identified by FDA prior to submission of the PMA application? And then we get into the checklist for filing review. And here it might be useful in both of these checklists to clearly identify where in the submission, if you go through and sort of pre-fill out one of these checklists, pre-identify where in your submission each of these details is going to be found, and make sure that throughout your documentation that your indications for use statements are consistent. That's one of the biggest things that we find in various submissions that can lead to an issue. It's going to be primarily for 510Ks, but this same kind of issue in terms of consistency across all of the documentation is a key aspect. That wraps us up for today's video. Thank you for joining me for today's guidance review, where we went through the acceptance and filing reviews for pre-market approval applications, or PMAs, and just want you to have 3 key takeaways from today's video. 1, basic review policies and procedures. 2, acceptance and filing review principles. And 3, checklists for acceptance and filing of PMAs. Again, thank you for joining us. Really hope that you found today's content informative and useful. Please like and subscribe and give us your comments, give us your feedback. We rely on it in terms of creating new content that you're going to enjoy. I really look forward to catching you in the next video. Bye for now.